Now, after doing the rights related to the freedom of religion, we move on to the two sets of rights which are falling under the broader category of cultural and educational rights. Now, you have to notice that these are actually about the minorities. So, minorities include both religious and linguistic. Therefore, the religious component also is covered here. That is what you have to remember, because when we discussed about the idea that what makes a secular state, that the state will be neutral and impartial towards all the religions, we did notice, I gave you in the previous lecture also, that it covered not only the articles from 25 to 28 but also 29 and 30, considering the idea that the religious minorities are also covered here. So articles 29 and 30 falls under this, and this is the second last to be done, because after that only one article is left, which is article 32, and then we'll finish the fundamental rights as such. Okay, now firstly we'll see what is verbatim written for article number 29. So we have the cultural and the educational rights here, in which article number 29 says protection of interests of minorities. Now please notice that even though the minority term is used here also and here also, but they have not defined that what will constitute minority, like what number. In general, we know that less than 50% is considered to be minority, but otherwise there is no definition of the term minority in the constitution. That is the first prelims point you should remember. Moving on, when it says protection of interest of minority in the heading, but in the explanation it says any section of the citizens. Now when of course you have to focus here that it is about citizen, okay, and here also it is about citizens, like all minorities, etc. So these articles are about the citizen, that you have to remember, and not any person in random. But when it is telling any section of the citizens, it is very much giving you the idea that section here will mean a group. So that group can be a minority, or that group can be a majority also, because there is no clear-cut explanation within the description that we are talking about minorities, even though we have talked about it in the heading. So Supreme Court has said that because here they are using the term section, and that to any section of the citizens, so which definitely includes minority and majority also, and this has come from Supreme Court only. Therefore in this we consider both minority and majority grouping for this article. For this, things will be different. We'll move on to see that later, but for the time being, so firstly, what is one thing that you will remember from here? Any section of citizens, which means it will include minority and majority. Now when we say section, we mean a group. So this right is protecting the right of the group and not individual as such. Then it is applicable only for the citizens and not for the aliens. Okay, these are the three things that you will remember first. Secondly, residing in the territory of India or any part thereof, having a distinct language, culture or a script or culture. So कल्चरल एंड एजुकेशनल राइट है, तो एक एस्पेक्ट कल्चर से रिलेटेड है, दूसरा एजुकेशनल इंस्टीट्यूशन से रिलेटेड है, दिस ऑल्सो एंड दिस ऑल्सो. But here they are talking about these three things. One is your language, script or culture. So any group of people who are having their own, this is very important, because otherwise what is the point of giving it a separate privilege, right? So any section of citizens who are having their own language, script or culture shall have the right to conserve the same. So what is the right which is given in this particular article 29? Conservation of the distinct language, script or culture of any group of people. It can be minority or majority, but they need to be the citizens of India. I hope I have made myself clear. I have given a very broad explanation of it. Moving on to clause 2 of article 29, it says no citizen shall be denied admission. तो ये तो कल्चर को प्रिजर्व करने के लिए हो गया. What about the educational rights of the people? So here we are telling that no citizen shall be denied admission into any educational institution. but this educational institution has to fulfill certain criteria. What is the criteria? That it should be maintained by the state. So either state is completely maintaining any educational institution, or if the state funds are being given to that educational institution as an aid. So in either way, if the state is involved in that educational institution, no citizen can be denied admission. Okay? And what are the criteria of non-denying of admission? So you will say that if I go to any educational institution maintained by the state, and will I be granted admission? No. Why? Because there are several criteria which are decided by the educational authority that you have to fulfill. Because for whatever course you will apply, you need to fulfill those criteria. So then you will say ki, why is this article then given as a fundamental right? Because they have specifically mentioned that denial of admission, what they are talking about here is on the basis of certain grounds only, certain discriminatory grounds like religion, race, caste, language, or any of them. So basically these are the criteria: religion, race, caste, or language. That on this basis you will not be denied admission. But you can be denied admission even in a state maintained educational institution if you do not fulfill any other criteria which they give in the notification. I hope you are clear. Only these criteria are you would say given to you as something which is preserved, or let's say you say ki as a privilege to the people of non-discrimination. But for the other criteria, anything can happen. So this is about article number 29. Let's see notes book का मिला करके जो notes हैं हमारे पास, उसमें whatever information we have got. The first thing is that any section of citizen is being talked about who is a resident in any part of India. So therefore it is a right of group. Distinct language, script and culture will be preserved, and right of conservation lies with the particular group of citizens. Also, no citizen will be denied admission into any educational, that we have seen. But this clause is for the individual of the community. So notice here, within the same article only, the first clause is for the group of people. And within the same article only, the second clause is for the individual, because as a group you will not go into any educational institution for admission. You will go individually. So this is a group right, and this is a individual of that community right, or any group right. Okay, moving on. So we have seen that it includes the protection to both religious and linguistic minority, but considering the term section of citizens, Supreme Court has said that it will include minority and majority both. Also, there has been a clarification given by the Supreme Court that in this particular above one, when we say right to conserve the distinct language, it includes the right to agitate for the protection of language. So if there is any agitation which is talking about that my language should be protected, that will be allowed. So if there are any, let's say, political speeches given or any political promises made that certain language conservation would take place, it will not amount to corrupt practices under the Representation of People Act 1951. What it is, we will do when we do the topic of election. It is basically giving you certain directions about how the election process and the conduct, all of that should happen. But if the political speeches or promises are made about the conservation, if in that they are promising that okay, we will conserve a particular language, etc., and if they are asking vote for that, that is okay, that is allowed. But if you remember in the previous class we did that if religion ke basis pe they are asking for vote, that is not allowed. If language conservation ke basis pe they are asking any vote, that is okay. ठीक है, यहाँ पे we are not talking about the language which is being spoken by the people, that I am speaking a particular language X, so if you are also speaking a particular language X, please vote me. No, it is about conservation of that language. If some political party is promising that okay, if we come into power, we will conserve a particular language of any minority or a majority in this case also, which might be facing any kind of a threat. Okay, so understand the difference here. Okay, moving on the next article, which is article number 30. Let's see the verbatim words here. It says right of minority to establish and administer the educational institution. Here it was talking about admission into the educational institution. Here it is talking about if any grouping, and specifically minority. Why? Because here in the explanation they have only talked about the minority very categorically, very clearly. But here it was any section of citizen, despite of the word being used in the heading. And remember, there is no definition of the term given anywhere in the constitution. So what does it say? If the any minority group wants to establish any educational institution or want to administer any educational institution, what are the rights they have? Okay. So they are telling all minorities, whether based on religion or language. So it is again clarified here that the minority could be a religious minority or a linguistic minority, but we will consider both. But any minority shall have the right to establish and administer educational institutions of their choice. So if they have a particular choice related to a particular educational institution, they want to establish or administer it, they have the right to do this. Further, what has been given? If a law will be made for the compulsory acquisition of any property of educational institution. Now focus on this. Firstly, it is said कि ठीक है, minority के पास right है if they want to establish or administer the educational institution. So let's say any minority grouping has established an educational institution. Now if the state wants, and that educational institution will be established on a land, piece of land, or some property. If the state needs that property for whatever reason, for the development or any such reason, so all of these things you will study in land reforms, and a partial of it we have already done in the right to property, if you remember, and we had already covered it in the earlier lecture. So somebody who has not seen that, please do check that, because that I'll not do again. So because it is related to that, you can see that this amendment, this clause 1A has been inserted by 44th Amendment Act 1978. If you remember, the right to property, which was earlier a fundamental right under 19(1)(f) also, and under Article 31 also, that was removed from the list of right to property, and then it was given just a status of a constitutional right or a legal right. So here the idea is that if the state would need to acquire that property, and that too compulsorily, because that land is non-negotiable, like the state would anyhow need that. So if any law is made which will provide for the compulsory acquisition of property of an educational institution which is established and administered by a minority. So if a law is made to acquire compulsorily the property of a minority educational institution. So now we will not read it as a full line, establish and administer. We will just in short say minority educational institution. So if the property of minority educational institution is to be compulsorily acquired and a law is to be made for that, ये clause 1 को लेकर के, the state has to ensure that the amount fixed by or determined under such law for the acquisition is such as would not restrict or abrogate the right guaranteed under that clause. What does that mean? It means that if you are compulsorily acquiring the property of a minority educational institution, you will have to for sure pay the compensation. That is very clearly mentioned, that you will have to fix an amount or you will have to determine an amount to pay back to the educational institution. ठीक है, but which also means that you will not give lesser amount, because indirectly it is telling that कि जो amount होगा mentioned in the law, it should not restrict or abrogate the right under this clause, which means because under this clause they have the right to establish and administer institution, and if they have established and you are taking their institution, so you will have to give the full compensation. Because if you give partial compensation or lesser compensation, what will happen? Their right will be abrogated or restricted, which is not allowed. So it is very clearly mentioned. Moving on, it is also said that the state shall not, in granting aid to the educational institution, so if the state, because we know that there could be multiple kinds of educational institutions, some might just get help from the state. So if the state is helping any educational institution, the state should not discriminate against any educational institution on the ground that it is under the management of a minority, religious or language. Which in other words mean that if the state is deciding to help any educational institution, and let's say if that educational institution is maintained by any minority, then the state will not discriminate it. So the state will give aid on the basis of the help needed and not on the basis of who is the responsibility, or let's say the authority, behind that institution. I hope that is clear. But then there have been certain clarifications on it. Let's see this now. So firstly, we have again certain revision would be here. After that, we'll see the clarifications. The first thing is religious or linguistic minority, then all have the right to administer compensation, etc. This was added by this only, and state will not discriminate, etc. We have also seen, I have told you that the term minority is not defined in the constitution. Also, Supreme Court, these are the extra information, that it has been declared by the court earlier that when we talk about this particular right, it includes the right of a minority to impart education to its children in its own language. Which means whatever medium will be used by that institution, which is maintained by a minority, they can decide on their own कि आपको किस language में पढ़ाई करवानी है, what will be the medium of your instruction. Apart from that, there are different categories of minority educational institutions. One, those institutions which are recognized by the state and getting help from the state. If such institution is here, there will be certain regulatory power of state, because state is involved in recognition also and aid also. Certain minority educational institutions will only need the recognition from the state. Let's say they are not getting any aid from the state. But because the state is involved in recognition, here also certain regulatory power will lie with the state. Regulatory power here means with respect to, let's say, deciding the syllabus curriculum, appointing teachers, non-teaching staff, what should be the criteria, etc., etc. In the regulation, in helping with that. But if there are certain minority educationals which is seeking none, neither getting any recognition, neither getting any aid from the state, then they are free to, so there definitely will not be any interference from the state, or let's say any regulation from the state. So they are free to administer their own affairs. However, their own affairs will also be subject to general laws. What kind of laws we can talk about? For example, if there is any taxation related law, if there is any other property related law, if there is any other legal aspect which is there for any other kind of institution also, any other kind of educational institution also, they will have to abide to it, because वो सारी चीज़ें तो एक general educational institution के लिए बनाई गई हैं. So they are not done specifically for the minority or majority, they are done in general, so they will also have to follow that. Okay. Moving on, Supreme Court ne, because there were certain confusions arising of how administration and all of that will happen. So in 2007, Supreme Court gave certain general principles which will be related to the establishment and administration of the minority educational institutions. What are the principles they talked about? That the minorities definitely are allowed to establish or administer the institutions of their choice, and they get certain rights. So what kind of rights they have talked about? First, that they can choose the governing body. Whosoever will govern, the grouping can choose that. And it will depend on the faith and confidence of the founders. So if the founders will have the faith and confidence in any certain governing body, they can choose them. They can also appoint teaching staff and also non-teaching staff. They will take action if the duty is not performed by the employees. They can admit eligible students of their choice. They can also set up reasonable fee structure. They can use its property and assets for the benefits of the institution. Secondly, under this article, the rights which are given to the educational institution and the groupings only ensure equality with majority. Now understand this. Because the constitution has specifically given certain provisions which are securing the rights of the minorities. So over and above that, the minorities will not get the privilege. Because the idea of already giving fundamental rights to minority is to ensure equality with the majority so that they do not feel left out. But it is not the intent of these articles to place them in any advantageous position कि हम minority को कोई privilege दे रहे हैं over the majority. No. बस हम मौका दे रहे हैं that you will stand in equality with the majority. Okay, so by helping them to a certain extent is okay, but not beyond that. Otherwise it will be a reverse discrimination in favor of minorities, which we are not intending to do. Also, this right to establish and administer is not absolute, because it will have the regulatory measures. We have seen that the regulatory measures will come from the state if needed. So state can from time to time keep checking if things are happening, even if they have the right, let's say, in choosing the governing body, appointing teaching staff and all of that. It does not prohibit the state from doing so. State, if one, can go for the regulatory mechanism to check. Unaided educational institutions, जिनको कोई help नहीं मिल रहा है, they can help नहीं मिल रहा है from the state, or let's say they do not want any help from the state, either way they can appoint teachers, lecturers by adopting any rational procedure of selection. क्योंकि यहाँ state का interference का कोई मतलब ही नहीं है. An extension of the aid by the state, if the state is giving any help, it does not alter the nature and character of the educational institution. So the minority educational institution should not consider any kind of help from the state as an interference. It is not intending to alter their nature or character कि वो minority से कुछ और हो जाएगा. No, it will remain the same. They will have their own sets of powers also, but as a regulatory mechanism, the state will also have certain rights. Okay? With this, I end the discussion here on these two articles, 29 and 30. Now, if you notice, 31 was removed, this right to property that we have seen. 31A, 31B and C, these are the exceptions to fundamental rights that we have already seen in the previous videos. So I would recommend, if you have not checked, please do check it from the earlier videos. That is what we have already covered. 31D was anyways removed, so no need of discussion. Then the last right that we will discuss in the set of fundamental rights is right to constitutional remedies, which is article number 32. And then it will be done. Okay, because 33, 34, 35, these are the extra things related to fundamental rights. This also I have done with you earlier only in the beginning of the discussion. So ये सब किया हुआ है और फिर उसके बाद ये DPS भी शुरू हो जाएगा. So the last thing that we'll cover in the next video is your right to constitutional remedies, article number 32. See you guys in the next one. Take care till then. Thank you so much. Bye bye.